The moment the general's laughter cut through the hangar, it felt like the air itself froze. The sound bounced off the metal walls, sharp, dismissive, like the kind of laugh that told you you didn't belong here. The janitor, Marcus, stood still, mop in hand, eyes lowered, pretending that the laughter didn't slice through his pride. He'd heard it all before. Every snicker, every joke about a brother cleaning up after the real heroes. But this time the general had taken it a step too far. "Hey, Alpha Zero." The general mocked, his deep southern drawl echoing. "That your secret code name or something? You some kind of superhero in disguise?" The soldiers around him chuckled. A few shook their heads like they knew it was wrong but didn't want to lose their place in the pack. The general smirked and took another sip of his coffee, leaning back like he owned not just the hangar but the whole damn base. Marcus didn't move. Not a muscle. His eyes flicked up for just a second, calm, unreadable, and that's when the temperature dropped. No one could explain it later. The air vents were off. The coffee in the general's mug turned icy. Frost crept up the walls like a ghost breathing through the steel. One by one, the soldiers' breaths became visible, fogging up in the cold that came from nowhere. The general blinked, confused. "What the hell?" Before he could finish, his words froze, literally. The sound hung midair like shattered glass. His eyes went wide as a thin layer of frost crawled across his uniform, his hand still clutching the cup that now cracked in two. Marcus dropped the mop, the sound echoing through the hangar. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke, and when he finally turned to leave, his calm voice cut through the silence. "Next time, General, remember the name." The soldiers stood there, paralyzed, staring at the frost-covered figure that had once been their commanding officer. And as Marcus walked out under the red emergency lights, one question burned in everyone's mind. Who the hell was Alpha Zero? Before the hangar turned into a freezer, Marcus Reed was just another face people passed by without really seeing. Every morning at Fort Arlington, he clocked in before sunrise, the world still dark and half asleep. He'd slip into his gray coveralls, grab his mop, and start working his way through the massive halls lined with flags, polished floors, and portraits of men who looked nothing like him. The brass liked to call it honor and service. Marcus called it survival. He was 33, tall, quiet, and built like someone who could carry the weight of the world, because, in a way he'd done his time overseas, but not in the way these soldiers thought. Most assumed he was just another janitor from the hood trying to pay bills. Nobody asked about his past, and Marcus sure as hell didn't offer it. He kept his head down, stayed polite, smiled when he had to. But behind those calm eyes was a storm, one built on years of watching the system break people who looked like him. He'd seen it in the streets of Detroit, in the eyes of friends who never made it out, and in every sideways glance from soldiers who thought cleaning up was all he was good for. Still, Marcus believed in something. Not justice, why, that was too clean a word. He believed in balance. Every morning he'd nod to the same few people who treated him decent. There was Private Williams, a young recruit from Georgia who always said, "Morning, Mr. Reed," with real respect in his tone. And there was Sergeant Daniels, a middle-aged black woman who saw more than she let on. She'd sometimes slide him a coffee and whisper, "Don't let them see what you got, baby. The world ain't ready for it." Marcus would smile softly. "Ain't planning to, Sarge." But lately something had shifted. There were new faces at the base. Scientists, higher-ups, people who didn't wear standard fatigues. Marcus had overheard whispers about Project Sentinel, a top-secret program testing enhanced soldiers. He'd seen crates labeled Cryotech Division being unloaded near the restricted zone. He didn't need to know more to understand danger when it was in the air. One night, while mopping the hangar after hours, he heard a group of soldiers laughing near the break area. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but one of them said his name. "Reed, that dude thinks he's slick," one soldier chuckled. "Always keeps to himself like he's got secrets. Man's just another janitor. Ain't no damn Alpha Zero." Marcus froze mid-swipe. That name again. Alpha Zero. He hadn't heard it in years. He turned slowly, heart pounding. That was a name only one person ever called him, back before everything went wrong, before the explosion, before the cover-up. Before the Army decided some lives were expendable. He finished his shift that night in silence, but the shadows seemed heavier, like the base itself remembered. The next morning, things escalated. The general, Robert H. Kavanaugh, had it out for him. A man carved out of old-school pride, silver hair, cold eyes, and a jawline that looked like it could cut glass. He strutted around like the base was his kingdom, and Marcus, just a reminder that the kingdom wasn't perfect. Kavanaugh didn't like reminders. He'd make jokes, little digs about Marcus being part of the cleanup crew in more ways than one. When Marcus stayed silent, the general pushed harder like he needed to prove something. One afternoon, while Marcus was cleaning near the briefing room, Kavanaugh cornered him. "Tell me something, Reed," he said, voice low, smug. "You ever think about doing something better with your life? Or you just enjoy cleaning up after real men?" Marcus paused, grip tightening on the mop. His jaw clenched, but he forced a polite smile. "Somebody's got to clean up the mess, sir. World don't stay shiny on its own." The soldiers nearby snickered. The general smirked, satisfied. But that night, Sergeant Daniels caught up with Marcus near the loading dock. "They poking the bear, huh?" she said quietly. Marcus leaned on his mop, sighing. "Yeah, just trying to keep my head low, Sarge." She shook her head. "You keeping it too low, baby. Sometimes the storm gotta show folks what it can do." He looked at her, eyes heavy. "You don't want that storm. Trust me." What neither of them knew, the storm was already building. Because in the shadows of that same hangar, deep in the restricted zone, a scientist named Dr. Keller was reviewing files with Marcus Reed's name stamped, classified. The data showed biometric spikes, cellular anomalies, cryogenic tolerance levels no human should have. And at the top of the file, under Project Sentinel, Subject 0, one name glowed in bold letters, Alpha 0. By the time the sun rose over Fort Arlington the next day, Marcus already knew something was off. The way soldiers looked at him, longer than usual, like they were waiting for him to slip up. Conversation stopped when he walked by. Even Private Williams, the kid who always smiled at him, couldn't hold eye contact. Something had changed overnight. When he entered the hangar, the mop bucket was already there, half-filled, reeking of bleach. Somebody had dumped oil across the floor and left a note taped to the door. "Clean it up, Alpha 0. Marcus stared at the paper for a long second. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. He didn't need a signature to know it came from the general's inner circle. He took a deep breath, rolling his shoulders. "All right," he muttered to himself. "Let's play it their way." He got to work, steady and quiet, even as soldiers passed by, whispering. Some laughed under their breath. Others just watched. The sting wasn't new, but today it hit harder. Inside, something was shifting. That afternoon, General Kavanaugh called for a routine inspection. Everyone lined up. Soldiers, staff, even janitors. Marcus stood at the far end, hands clasped behind his back, silent as ever. The general strutted down the line, eyes sharp, voice booming. "This base is a symbol of excellence, discipline, order. I don't want to see anyone slacking, especially those who ain't supposed to be here in the first place." He stopped right in front of Marcus. The silence was suffocating. "Tell me, Reed," Kavanaugh said with a thin smile. "You ever think maybe you're out of place here?" Marcus met his gaze. "Sir, I just do my job," the general chuckled. "Yeah, that's what they all say. But you people," he paused, smirk widening, "always think you can climb higher than you belong." The soldiers around shifted uncomfortably. Some stared straight ahead, refusing to react. Others glanced at Marcus, waiting for him to break, but he didn't. "Not yet," he just said, calm and clear. "Permission to get back to cleaning, sir?" That calmness, wearing that quiet control, then only made Kavanaugh angrier. "Dismissed," he snapped. "Before I find a reason to put you somewhere colder than this hangar." Marcus nodded, walking away slow. But that last word, colder, stuck with him like a warning. Later that night, Marcus found himself sitting alone in his small quarters, staring at a faded photo tucked inside a worn leather wallet. It was him, years younger, standing beside 3 other soldiers. All of them grinning, arms locked around each other. At the bottom, scrawled in ink, Project Sentinel, Alpha Squad. He could still remember that mission, the one that changed everything. They weren't supposed to be out there that long. The operation in Alaska had gone sideways fast. The storm hit and communications died. He'd lost 2 of his brothers that night, Johnson and Hayes. The last one, Captain Morgan, was presumed dead. But Marcus knew better. He'd watched him vanish under the ice right before the explosion. That's when the experiment kicked in. He'd felt it, his blood slowing, his vision sharpening as the world around him froze. He'd walked out of that storm untouched, while the rest never came back. After that, the Army buried Project Sentinel, and they buried him along with it, under a new name, new life, and a mop. The next day, the whispers grew louder. One soldier accidentally knocked over his bucket. Another muttered something about special treatment when Sergeant Daniels defended him. Even Williams avoided him now, whispering with others when he thought Marcus couldn't hear. At lunch, Marcus sat alone outside, watching a group of soldiers laughing over burgers near the mess hall. Their laughter carried, sharp, mocking. "Guess the janitor thinks he's a superhero," one said. "Yeah, man's got a code name. Alpha Zero," another laughed. "Bet he calls himself that in the mirror." Marcus clenched his jaw. He could feel the cold rise in his fingertips. The grass near his boots shimmered with frost. He took a deep breath, forcing it back down. Daniels showed up beside him, coffee in hand. "You all right?" she asked. "Peachy," he muttered. She eyed him. "I know that look. That's the same look I had when the brass tried to push me out of flight school for not fitting the image." He didn't answer. She leaned in closer. "Whatever's boiling inside you, don't let them control it. You hear me?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah, I hear you." But deep down, he knew it wasn't boiling. It was freezing. Meanwhile, inside the restricted zone, Dr. Keller sat in her lab staring at Marcus's old file. She wasn't supposed to have it, but curiosity had won out. Subject: Alpha Zero. Status: terminated. Notes: cryokinetic response triggered under extreme stress. Dangerous. Do not reinitiate. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. The security footage from Alaska was still classified, except for one frame she managed to decrypt. It showed Marcus standing in the middle of a whiteout storm, frost swirling around him, eyes glowing faint blue. She swallowed hard. Oh my God. Before she could dig deeper, the lab door opened. General Kavanaugh walked in. "Doctor," he said coldly, "we need to talk about Mr. Reed." By Friday, Marcus was barely sleeping. He could feel the tension crackling through the air. He was being watched, not just by soldiers, but by something else. That morning, he walked into the hangar and stopped dead. His locker was open, his things scattered across the floor. Inside, someone had scrawled across the door in red marker, "Go back to where you belong." He stood there for a long moment, jaw tight. Then, without a word, he cleaned it up, every mark, every smear, until nothing was left. But that quiet rage inside him? It wasn't gone. It was building. Later that day, Kavanaugh made his move. During a base inspection, he called Marcus out in front of everyone. "Reed," he barked, "you think this place is your playground? You've been snooping where you don't belong." Marcus frowned. "Sir, I just cleaned the—" "Don't lie to me," the general roared. "We know what you are." The soldiers froze. Daniels took a step forward. "Sir, maybe—" "Quiet," Kavanaugh snapped. He turned back to Marcus. "Tell me the truth, boy. What's Alpha Zero?" For the first time, Marcus's calm cracked. His hands trembled, the air around him dipping in temperature. "You don't want that answer," he said quietly. "Oh, I think I do," Kavanaugh sneered. "Because whatever that name means, it ends here." The lights flickered. Frost began to crawl along the floor. Kavanaugh took a step back, eyes narrowing. "What the hell?" Marcus clenched his fists, forcing the power back down, but it was too late. Everyone saw it. The frost creeping up his boots. The cold mist forming around his breath. Daniels whispered, "Lord have mercy." And right there in front of everyone, Marcus realized the truth. No matter how long he'd kept his head down, no matter how quiet he stayed, the storm was coming. And when it hit, nobody on that base would ever look at him the same again. The hangar looked like a battlefield by the time it was over. Frost covered every inch of the floor, every tool, every weapon rack. The air hung thick with mist so cold it burned to breathe. The general stood frozen mid-step, ice crawling up his uniform and locking him in a statue of shock and rage. Marcus stood in the middle of it all, chest heaving, eyes faintly glowing blue before dimming again. The silence was deafening. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. Sergeant Daniels was the first to react. "Marcus," she whispered, stepping forward, "what did you do?" He shook his head slowly. Didn't mean to. I just... He looked down at his trembling hands, the frost still fading from his fingertips. He pushed too far. One of the soldiers backed away, muttering, "He's a damn freak." Daniel shot him a glare. "Shut your mouth," but it was too late. The whispers started spreading like wildfire. Monster Weapon Project. Everyone in that hangar now knew that Marcus Reed was not just a janitor, and that scared the hell out of them. Within an hour, alarms were blaring. Military trucks swarmed the base, sirens echoing across the compound. Armed men in black tactical gear surrounded the hangar, moving with precision. Daniels tried to talk to them, flashing her badge. "He ain't a threat."
"He needs help."
But they shoved her aside. "Orders are orders, Sergeant." Marcus raised his hand, staying still as laser sights dotted his chest. "Ain't no need for all that," he said calmly. "I'm not your enemy." A soldier barked back. "Then explain what you did to the general." Marcus sighed. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Before anyone could answer, Dr. Keller ran in, clutching a folder. "Stop, don't shoot," she yelled. "He's part of Project Sentinel." The commander turned toward her. "That project was shut down years ago." "Yeah," Keller said breathlessly. "But not before they experimented on soldiers without consent. Enhanced genetics, cryoserum injections. He was one of them, the only one who survived." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Marcus stared at her, jaw tight. "You knew?" Keller nodded. "Not until I found your file. They buried you, Marcus. Classified you as terminated to cover up the experiment." Daniel stepped closer, fury burning in her eyes. "So y'all used him, tossed him aside, and now you call him a threat?" The commander didn't answer. He just signaled his men forward. Marcus glanced around, then all those rifles aimed at him, all those faces filled with fear. He could feel the cold rising again, that instinct kicking in to protect himself. But then he saw Williams, the young recruit who used to greet him every morning, standing near the door, trembling, torn between fear and guilt. That sight hit Marcus harder than any bullet could. He dropped to his knees, palms open. "I ain't fighting y'all," he said softly. "Just tell the truth. Tell the world what you did to us." For a moment, nobody moved. Then the commander lowered his weapon. "Take him into custody," he said flatly. They moved him to a holding cell deep beneath the base. No windows, just metal walls and fluorescent light that never turned off. Marcus sat on the edge of the cot, staring at his hands, now just hands again. Human. Warm. Daniels visited him that night, slipping past the guards like she always found a way. "You know they ain't gonna let you walk out of here," she whispered. Marcus smiled faintly. "I know." She sat beside him. "You saved folks back there. That general, he'd been gunning for you since day one. Maybe the world needed to see what happens when a man gets pushed too far." He looked at her, eyes tired but soft. "Yeah, but at what cost?" Daniel sighed. "At least now they can't hide the truth. Dr. Keller's already talking to reporters. Folks on the outside gonna know your name. Not as no janitor, but as Alpha Zero." He chuckled quietly. "Didn't think that name had come back around." She smiled. "Funny how life circles back, huh?" They sat in silence for a while. Then Daniels whispered, "You scared?" Marcus looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers slowly. "Not of them. I'm scared of what I might become if I let the hate win." By morning, news had already leaked. Headlines flashed across national networks. Ex-soldier used in secret military experiment, now branded a threat. Project Sentinel exposed, government tested on its own. The country was split. Some called him a monster. Others called him a hero. Protesters gathered outside Fort Arlington, demanding justice. Inside his cell, Marcus could hear the chants echoing faintly through the vents. "Let him go. Let him go." Dr. Keller managed one last visit before she was escorted off base. "They're moving you tomorrow," she said, voice trembling. "I don't know where." Marcus smiled faintly. "Wherever it is, Doc. I'll survive." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "You always do." That night, the guards found the cell door wide open. The security cameras glitched, showing only static and frost on the lens. Marcus Reed, Alpha Zero, was gone. Outside, a storm rolled in over the base, snow swirling under flashes of lightning. And somewhere out there, walking through the night, a man in a gray coverall looked up at the sky and whispered, "Balance." For the first time in years, he smiled. Not because he was free, but because finally the world knew the truth. The hangar lights flickered like dying stars, red alarms painting everything in flashes of chaos and fear. It was supposed to be another routine inspection, but Marcus knew something was off the second he stepped in. The air felt heavier, colder, like the storm inside him was being pulled to the surface. Soldiers lined the catwalks above, rifles trained on him. Below, General Kavanaugh stood with a smug grin, flanked by armed guards. He wasn't frozen anymore, and at least not on the outside. Well, look who decided to show up, Kavanaugh sneered. The janitor who thought he could be a god. Marcus's jaw clenched. You should have left me buried. Oh, I don't bury monsters, the general said, pacing slowly. I expose them. He gestured to a large monitor flickering behind him. On the screen was live footage, cameras set up around the hangar. This is going straight to the Pentagon feed. The whole damn chain of commands watching. Marcus's stomach turned. He wanted a show. Kavanaugh stepped closer. You think people out there care about you? A black janitor with freak powers? You're a headline, that's all. A weapon gone wrong. Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. You don't get to call me that. The general smirked, leaning in. Oh, I get to call you whatever I damn well please. You were property of this country before you could even vote. That broke something inside Marcus. The hangar lights blew out. The air temperature plummeted. Frost exploded from the floor, racing up the walls. Soldiers screamed as their rifles iced over. Metal locking tight. Breath turned to vapor. Stand down, someone shouted. But the order was useless. The storm had arrived. Kavanaugh stumbled backward, face pale, eyes wide. What the hell are you? Marcus's voice echoed through the cold. I'm what you made me. He raised his hands and the ground split open with ice veins spreading like lightning. The glass panels on the upper decks shattered. The soldiers dropped their weapons, panic flooding the room. Daniels burst through the side door, screaming over the roar of wind. Marcus! Stop! They'll kill you if you do this! Marcus's eyes burned bright blue. They already did. She tried to push through the storm, frost biting at her skin. You ain't them, Marcus. You ain't no monster. For a second, just a second, his expression softened. But then he saw the general reach for his sidearm. The world snapped again. A wall of ice shot upward, separating Marcus and Daniels. The general raised his gun and fired, 1, 2, 3 shots. The sound echoed like thunder, but the bullets froze mid-air, hanging inches from Marcus's chest before shattering like glass. Marcus stepped forward, ice crunching under his boots. The general backed up, shaking now. You're not human. Marcus's voice dropped low, dangerous. Neither are the people who made me this way. He reached out, his hand glowing cold blue, frost spiraling outward. The general's breath hitched, ice climbing up his arm as he tried to raise his weapon again, too slow. Tell them the truth, Marcus said through clenched teeth. Tell them what you did to us. Kavanaugh's voice cracked. You think anyone will believe you? You think anyone cares? Marcus paused, then almost whispering said, They will now. He slammed his hand into the floor. The ice erupted, crawling up the walls, engulfing the control panels, the cameras, the feed, freezing the entire system solid. Sparks burst as circuits shorted out. The storm consumed the hangar, wind howling like 1,000 screams. Soldiers ducked behind crates, frost crawling up their boots. Daniels fought her way through, shouting his name, but the cold was too thick to see through. Marcus, please, she cried. On the far side of the room, Kavanaugh collapsed to his knees, his arm frozen solid, breath ragged. You'll never be free, he hissed. You'll always be what we built. Marcus looked down at him, eyes glowing brighter. Then I'll tear down what you built. He raised both arms and the entire hangar cracked. Walls, ceiling, even the floor. A blinding wave of frost exploded outward, bursting through the roof. Ice shards scattered like diamonds in the air as the blizzard consumed the base. For a moment, everything was silent. Nothing but the sound of the storm breathing. Then, as the cold faded, the alarms went dead. The soldiers looked around in disbelief. The general was gone, frozen where he stood, a statue of arrogance and fear. And Marcus, he was kneeling in the center of it all, frost steaming off his body, exhausted, trembling. Daniel stumbled toward him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. It's over, she whispered. You did it, he shook his head weakly. No, it's just starting. From outside, faint sirens echoed. Reinforcements. More trucks. More guns. Daniels looked at him, panic in her voice. We gotta go, Marcus. They'll lock you away forever. He met her eyes, calm but heavy with sorrow. If I leave now, they'll just cover it up again. She gripped his jacket. Then what are you going to do? Marcus looked up at the shattered ceiling, the snow swirling through the gap. Make him remember. He stood weak but resolute. The frost under his boots melted slightly as he walked toward the door. Soldiers parted without a word. Nobody dared stop him. Outside, the morning sun cut through the snowstorm, rays of light glinting off ice-coated vehicles. Marcus paused at the gate, turning back one last time. The base, his prison, now looked like a monument carved in frost. He whispered to himself, "No more cleaning up their mess." Then, with a gust of cold air, he vanished into the white. Hours later, the footage from the hangar, the moment the general was frozen, leaked online. Nobody knew who posted it, but the world watched in disbelief. A government cover-up. A black soldier-turned experiment. An entire base buried under ice. And one name echoing through every news channel, every hashtag, every protest chant: Alpha Zero. He had become more than a man. He was a symbol. The storm they tried to silence but couldn't. The snowstorm had faded, leaving the base eerily quiet. Morning sunlight streamed across shattered walls, melting frost into puddles that reflected a world forever changed. Marcus stood outside the gates of Fort Arlington, the cold wind biting at his face, but inside, he felt warmer than he had in years. The hangar was still a monument to the chaos that had unfolded, a frozen reminder of the injustice, the lies and the cover-ups that had been buried for decades. But now everyone knew. The world knew. For the first time, Marcus felt something he hadn't allowed himself in a long time. Hope. Not blind hope, but the hard kind forged from struggle and survival. He thought about the soldiers who had laughed at him, the general who tried to destroy him, and the scientists who treated him like an experiment. All of them had underestimated him, and all of them had seen the storm he carried inside. Word had spread fast. News channels ran footage over and over. The general frozen mid-step, the hangar transformed into a winter battlefield, and Marcus walking calmly through the storm. Hashtags exploded online. Alpha Zero, Justice for Marcus, and Project Sentinel exposed. Protesters gathered outside Fort Arlington demanding accountability, while others debated the morality of the experiments. But beyond the headlines, Marcus thought about what really mattered, the truth and what it could do for people like him. For every black man or woman pushed to the margins, ignored, told to keep their head down, for every kid growing up in neighborhoods where systemic racism was just another lesson to survive. He remembered the faces of friends he'd lost: Johnson, Hayes, Captain Morgan. They hadn't been given a choice, and neither had he. But he had survived. And now he had a voice. Daniel stood beside him, arms crossed, watching the protesters. "You ready for this?" she asked. Marcus looked out over the crowd. "I don't think I'll ever be ready, but maybe I don't gotta be. Maybe all I gotta do is show folks what it looks like to fight back and survive." She nodded. "You already did more than most people dream of." He shook his head slowly. "Nah, they don't get it yet. Most folks out there still don't see the system for what it is. They still think if you work hard, you'll be fine. But that ain't true. Not for everyone. Not for the people who get pushed down before they even get started." The wind gusted stronger, carrying the distant sounds of sirens, shouting, cameras clicking. Marcus smiled faintly. "That's why I'm here. To remind him." And with that, he turned, walking into the city. No uniform, no coveralls, just himself. One man who had survived the impossible, carrying a storm inside that couldn't be silenced. The story of Alpha Zero wasn't just about one black janitor turned super soldier. It was about resilience, about the quiet power of standing up when the world wants you down. It was about exposing the systems built to oppress and reminding people that justice isn't given. It's earned. As Marcus disappeared into the streets, Daniels called after him, "Don't let him forget who you are." He paused, looking back over his shoulder. "I won't. Not ever." And in that moment, every protester, every viewer, every citizen who watched the story unfold felt it. The ripple effect of one man refusing to stay in his place, refusing to be invisible. The world had seen Alpha Zero, and maybe, just maybe, they'd start asking why the world had tried to bury him in the first place. The question lingered like the frost in the hangar. How many more Alpha Zeros are out there, fighting battles we'll never see, and what are we doing to let them survive?